The afternoon settled into the plain with a kind of heavy stillness, the kind that flattened sound and slowed even the smallest movement. Heat shimmered above the grass, bending the horizon into pale waves. In that quiet, a single figure moved carefully across the open ground, boots pressing softly into dust that had not been disturbed in days. He had learned to listen for more than noise. Sometimes it was the absence of it that spoke first. No birds lifted from the grass. No insects hummed near the scattered shrubs. Even the wind seemed reluctant to pass through. At the center of that silence lay the lion. He was stretched along a narrow strip of shade cast by a stunted acacia, his body angled as if he had collapsed mid-step and never gathered the strength to rise again. One foreleg lay twisted slightly beneath him. His ribs lifted and fell in shallow, uneven patterns, barely moving the dust clinging to his coat. The mane around his neck, once thick and dark, had thinned into matted strands that clung to sweat and dried blood. His eyes were half open, unfocused, reflecting nothing in particular. The conservation worker slowed instinctively. Each step became smaller, quieter, placed with intention. He had seen lions resting before, stretched lazily after long hunts, muscles loose, breathing deep and slow. This was different. This was the stillness of something holding on. The lion's flank shuddered with a weak breath. A faint rasp escaped his throat, more vibration than sound. His tail lay limp against the dirt, unmoving even as flies gathered along its edge. Every few seconds, his ears twitched faintly, reacting to something distant and indistinct, as though sound reached him only after struggling through layers of fatigue and pain. The man stopped several meters away and waited. He knelt slowly, lowering himself until he was level with the animal's line of sight. Sweat traced narrow paths down his temples, darkening the collar of his shirt. He did not reach for his radio. Not yet. He wanted first to understand what he was seeing, to let the moment unfold without intrusion. The lion shifted his head by a few centimeters. The effort was visible. Muscles trembled beneath thinning fur. His jaw opened slightly, then closed again as if the simple act of breathing demanded negotiation. One paw flexed weakly, claws barely emerging before retreating. Days of hunger had hollowed his body. The powerful shoulders that once carried him through tall grass were sunken now, bones pressing close to skin. Old scars crossed his legs and muzzle, silent records of past survival. But this injury was new. A dark stain spread along his side, where fur had been rubbed away. Beneath it, flesh was swollen, warm, inflamed. The man whispered without thinking, his voice barely disturbing the air. "It's okay, big guy." The lion did not respond. But his eyes shifted slightly, catching movement. For a moment, awareness flickered there. Not trust. Not fear. Something quieter. Recognition without energy. A breeze passed through the grass, lifting dust into soft spirals. It carried the smell of dry earth and distant water. The lion's nostrils flared faintly, then relaxed again. His chest rose, hesitated, fell. The worker remained still, hands resting open on his knees. He knew that approaching too fast could provoke panic, could drain what little strength remained. He also knew that waiting too long could mean losing the chance entirely. Around them, the land continued its slow rhythm. Shadows shifted. A cloud crossed the sun and softened the light. Somewhere far away, a bird called once, then fell silent. The lion's breathing steadied slightly, finding a fragile rhythm. His tail twitched once, barely perceptible, then lay still again. Dust clung to his whiskers. A faint tremor passed through his flank and faded. The man lifted his radio at last, pressing it gently, quietly. He spoke in low tones, measured and calm, never taking his eyes off the animal. As he waited for a response, the wind brushed through the grass again, bending it in slow waves. Light pooled along the edge of the acacia's shadow. The lion remained where he was, suspended between endurance and surrender, while the afternoon stretched on, holding its breath with him. Time passed without shape or measure. The sun shifted slowly, changing the angle of light across the lion's body, revealing details that had been hidden in glare and shadow. From where he knelt, the conservation worker began to notice small signs that spoke quietly of what the animal had endured. The cracked texture of his nose, dry and pale. The way his tongue briefly touched his lips between breaths, searching for moisture that was no longer there. The hollowed skin along his ribs that tightened each time he inhaled. He leaned forward slightly, careful not to disturb the fragile calm that had settled between them. The wound along the lion's side was worse up close. The flesh was swollen and uneven, bordered by fur stained dark and stiff. A faint, sour smell rose from it, barely noticeable in the open air, but unmistakable to someone who had seen infection before. Flies gathered there in patient circles, landing and lifting again, persistent and tireless. The lion flicked an ear weakly, unable to summon the strength to drive them away. Dehydration had tightened his muscles into rigid lines. Even resting, his body looked strained, as if every position caused discomfort. When he shifted his weight slightly, a low sound escaped his throat, not a roar, not a growl, just a soft vibration shaped by pain and fatigue. The man reached into his pack with slow, deliberate movements. Each motion was broken into small pieces, visible and predictable. He removed a shallow metal bowl and a bottle of water, unscrewing the lid without letting it click. He poured carefully, listening to the faint splash as it filled. He placed the bowl on the ground several feet away, then withdrew his hand and waited. The lion did not move at first. His eyes followed the motion faintly, lids heavy, blinking once as if the effort cost him. The scent of water drifted through the warm air. His nostrils widened slightly. His chest rose and fell. Minutes passed. The man shifted his own position to block more sunlight, creating a larger patch of shade that stretched closer to the lion's head. He angled his body sideways, making himself smaller, less imposing. His breathing slowed, matching the quiet rhythm of the place. "It's all right," he murmured, barely above a whisper. The lion's head lifted by a few centimeters, trembling as muscles protested. He paused, lowered it again, then tried once more. Dust slid from his mane in thin streams. His front paw dragged forward, carving a shallow line in the dirt. Another pause. Another breath. He inched closer, movement measured and uncertain, like an animal testing the strength of thin ice. When his nose finally reached the bowl, he hesitated, sniffing carefully. Then his tongue touched the surface. He drank slowly. Each lap was cautious, interrupted by long pauses. Water spilled down his chin and darkened the soil. After several moments he leaned back, exhausted, chest heaving slightly more than before. But something had shifted. The tension in his shoulders softened by degrees. His eyes, though still clouded with fatigue, lingered briefly on the man. The worker remained where he was, hands open, gaze gentle. He did not celebrate. He did not move closer. He allowed the space between them to remain untouched. Around them, grass whispered under a passing breeze. Insects returned to their quiet routines. The sun slid lower, warming less, forgiving more. Between a wounded animal and a patient human, trust began to form without words, held together by restraint, water, and the simple decision to stay. Evening arrived gradually without announcement. The sharp edges of light softened, and the plain took on deeper tones of gold and muted brown. Heat released its grip in slow stages, rising from the ground in faint currents. The lion lay where he had settled after drinking, his body angled slightly toward the shade, breathing still uneven but no longer ragged. The man moved only when necessary. He waited until the animal's eyes drifted half-closed before shifting closer by small degrees, sliding his knees through the dust, pausing between each motion. The lion noticed. His ears tilted back briefly, not in warning but in uncertainty. His chest tightened, breaths becoming shallow and quick for a few moments, then easing again when the man stopped. The wound was flushed carefully with clean water, poured in thin streams that followed the curve of damaged flesh. Each time the cool liquid touched inflamed skin, the lion's muscles tightened. A faint tremor passed through his frame. His jaw clenched. He did not attempt to rise. The man spoke softly, more to steady himself than to instruct. "Easy now." The words drifted into the open air and disappeared. Antiseptic followed, applied gently with cloth, never pressing, never lingering too long in one place. The smell cut through the dry evening scents, sharp and unfamiliar. The lion's nose wrinkled faintly. His tail lifted once and fell again. One paw flexed, claws grazing the dirt, then relaxed. Acceptance came in fragments. His ears lowered, not flat, but angled in quiet surrender. His breathing shortened, then found a fragile rhythm. He turned his head away slightly as if choosing not to watch. When discomfort peaked, a low sound escaped his throat, almost swallowed before it could form. Then it faded, replaced by silence. The man worked in brief intervals, resting between them. He watched for signs of panic, for any shift that meant he should withdraw. None came. Instead, the lion remained, anchored by exhaustion and something resembling fragile trust. Night gathered at the edges of the land. Stars emerged slowly, scattered and distant. Temperature dropped, settling coolness into muscle and bone. The grass darkened into shadowed waves. Somewhere far off, a hyena laughed once, then again, its voice thin and echoing. The man positioned himself a short distance away, close enough to intervene, far enough to respect space. He lit no fire. He made no sudden sounds. His jacket wrapped tightly around his shoulders, he sat with his back against a low rock, eyes never leaving the shape of the lion in the dim light. When wind passed through, he shifted to block it. When clouds gathered, he adjusted his pack to form a small barrier. When distant calls grew louder, he stood briefly, making his presence known, then settled again. The lion slept in fragments. His head lifted occasionally, responding to sounds only he seemed to hear. Each time he found the man still there. Each time he lowered it again. In the quiet hours before dawn, dew formed along his whiskers. His breathing deepened slightly. Pain remained, but it no longer ruled every movement. Around them, the land held its silence. Trees, stones, and empty sky bore witness without comment. No cameras recorded it. No audience watched. Only a wounded animal and a patient human shared the long night, bound together by stillness, vigilance, and the simple act of refusing to leave. Morning arrived quietly, filtered through thin layers of cloud and dust. The sky shifted from deep blue to pale silver, then softened into muted gold. Light spread slowly across the grass, revealing shapes that had existed all night in shadow. The man had not slept. His eyes were heavy, his body stiff, but he remained seated where he had been, wrapped in stillness. The lion lay unchanged at first. His flank rose and fell in steady rhythm. Dew clung to his mane and whiskers. A faint line of dried blood traced the edge of his wound, now dulled by careful cleaning. When a breeze passed, his ears twitched once, then settled again. Fatigue pressed on both of them. The man felt it in his shoulders, in the quiet ache behind his eyes. Doubt drifted in without warning. Doubt about whether the night's vigilance had been enough. About whether infection would still take hold. About whether the animal had the strength left to rise. He shifted slightly, careful not to disturb the fragile balance. Then the lion moved. At first it was almost invisible. A tightening of muscle beneath skin. A subtle gathering of limbs. His head lifted a few centimeters, held there, trembling. He paused, breathing shallowly as though testing the weight of his own body. The man froze. The lion's front paw slid forward. Claws scratched lightly against stone. His shoulder followed, rising slowly, unevenly. Pain traveled through him in visible waves. His ears flattened briefly, then lifted again. A low breath escaped his chest, controlled, restrained. He paused halfway, chest hovering above the ground. For several long seconds he remained there, suspended between collapse and effort. His sides quivered. Dust slipped from his mane. His jaw tightened. Then, with a careful shift of weight, he pushed. Hind legs straightened in stages. One faltered, recovered. His spine curved, then steadied. At last he stood. Not tall. Not proud. Not strong. But standing. The man did not move. His hands rested loosely on his knees. His breath slowed until it matched the rhythm of the moment. In the distance, shapes emerged from the morning haze. A small group of lions stood along a low ridge, barely visible against the pale sky. They were spaced apart, alert, bodies angled forward. Heads lifted. Tails hung still. They did not approach. They did not retreat. They watched. The injured lion turned his head slightly in their direction. His ears rotated, catching faint sounds. For a moment, uncertainty passed through him. Muscles tightened. His stance shifted as if preparing for movement. He did not go. Instead, he remained where he was, beside the quiet human presence he had come to accept. The man spoke once softly. "You're doing good." The words were carried away by wind. The lion's breathing steadied. His gaze moved back toward the open plain. He lowered himself carefully, not collapsing but settling into a seated position. One paw rested ahead of him, bearing only part of his weight. His tail curled loosely against the ground. Across the distance, the distant lions adjusted their stance. One stepped forward, then stopped. Another lowered its head slightly. They remained observers, sensing change without understanding its source. Between them, something rare held. No fear. No rush. No flight. Just presence. Sunlight strengthened, warming fur and skin alike. Grass stirred in slow waves. Birds resumed their calls. Life gathered itself again around a fragile victory. The lion remained beside the man, balanced between instinct and trust, standing proof that survival sometimes begins not with speed or strength, but with the courage to stay. The days that followed unfolded in gentle increments, measured not by clocks or schedules, but by breath, movement, and small signs of returning strength. The lion no longer lay motionless for hours at a time. He shifted more often now, adjusting his position to catch warmth in the morning and shade in the afternoon. His breathing deepened, finding steadier rhythms. Water no longer remained untouched for long. Each time it was offered, he drank with growing confidence, less hesitation, fewer pauses. The wound closed slowly. Swelling softened. The sharp scent of infection faded into the background of dust and grass. New fur began to trace its edges, thin and pale at first, then thickening with time. When flies gathered, he flicked them away with brief, efficient movements. When wind passed through, his ears responded without delay. The man remained nearby, present without insistence. He continued his quiet routines, cleaning, observing, adjusting shade and distance as needed. He spoke rarely now. Words were no longer necessary. Their communication existed in posture, in timing, in shared understanding of space. One morning, the lion stood without trembling. He rose in a single, deliberate motion. His legs held. His back remained steady. He took several steps, slow but confident, testing ground that had once felt uncertain. Dust lifted beneath his paws and settled again. The man watched from where he stood, heart heavy and light at once. Across the plain, movement gathered. The pride approached in fragments, emerging from tall grass and distant ridges. One by one, familiar shapes took form. Strong bodies. Alert eyes. Tails swaying in low arcs. They did not rush. They advanced with calm assurance, stopping often to observe. The lion turned toward them. This time there was no hesitation. He walked forward. His gait was still uneven, favoring one side slightly, but it was steady. Each step carried purpose. When he reached them, they met him without ceremony. A brief touch of noses. A quiet circling. A low shared breath. No display. No sound. Just belonging restored. For a moment he paused. He turned his head back. The man stood alone now against the wide land, small in scale, unmoving. Their eyes met across the distance. No meaning was assigned. No interpretation forced. Only recognition of something that had passed between them and would never return in quite the same form. The lion lowered his head slightly, then turned away. He followed his pride. They moved together, flowing across the plain like a living current, weaving through grass and shadow. Slowly their shapes softened into silhouettes, then into fragments, then into memory. The man remained where he was long after they vanished. Wind moved through empty space where bodies had been. Grass bent and lifted again. A bird crossed the sky and disappeared. The sun leaned toward afternoon. He packed his things in silence. No record was made. No celebration followed. What remained was quieter than that. A place where trust had briefly existed between worlds. A stretch of earth where survival had been shared. And in the distance, where land met sky, a fading line of movement carried on, leaving behind only light, wind, and a story that would live quietly in the spaces between remembering and letting go.